CFL 110, your weekly trip around the biggest stories in the Canadian Football League with Jeff Hamilton and Andrew Hustler Paterson. Presented by Garage Living Winnipeg.
Hey, what's going on, CFL fans, and welcome to another edition of CFL 110 here on the Winnipeg Sports Talk Network. Andrew Paterson, Jeff Hamilton of the Winnipeg Free Press. And we've got a packed show today, including some breaking news that's dropped just as we head into the recording studio. Before we get to that, first up, want to thank our great partners and sponsors at Garage Living Winnipeg for making CFL 110 available to all CFL fans. Folks, the push is on. If you want to have a clean, organized garage this season before the snow flies, give Garage Living a call at 999-1234. It's been a very busy, very productive summer for Pat and the guys at Garage Living. They've transformed dozens of garages in and around the city. Now they're gearing up for a busy fall as the push is on to get clients booked, garages designed, and installations complete before winter. Don't miss your chance to clear the clutter, organize and beautify your garage with polyaspartic floor coating, made in Canada premium metal cabinetry, and slat wall storage solutions. Not to mention lifts to work on your car or potentially sled in the winter. Check out their website at garageliving.com or call our pal Pat Kanuga. He is loving the shift from former early morning radio guy to garage designer. You can give Pat a call at 204-999-1234 for a chat about what can be done in your garage. Maybe make an appointment to meet him in their showroom at 981 Main Street. Garage Living Winnipeg, garages made for living. All right, let's get to it. We welcome in Jeff Hamilton. And Hammer, as we get into the recording studio early on Tuesday, it's a good thing producer Remus had a bit of a technical snafu that paused us about 10 minutes, because otherwise we'd be going back to the drawing board and starting over, because literally just this morning word has come out that Nathan Rourke is back with the British Columbia Lions. I'll read the tweet out. The Lions just put out breaking 2022 CFL Most Outstanding Canadian Nathan Rourke is returning to the BC Lions. Rourke will arrive at the club's facility for Wednesday practice with media availability to follow at 1:30 p.m. Of course, Rourke had signed with the Atlanta Falcons, which was a bit of a head scratcher, got into preseason action on the weekend, was 3 of 13, certainly a far cry from his star-turning preseason performance last year in Jacksonville, and found himself as a free agent. I'll admit, we were having a similar conversation yesterday, and I estimated the chance of Rourke being back in the CFL this year in the single digits. This is somewhat stunning news. And the fact of the matter is, BC's struggling. Vernon Adams is hurt. You've got this rematch with the Bombers on Sunday, not Friday, not Thursday. I'm not even ruling out going from Nathan Rourke's not back in the CFL yesterday all year to him being in the game on Sunday. What was your reaction to this news that came out just a little while ago?
I had to pick my chin off the floor, man. I mean, I'm absolutely floored by this news. Sure, it maybe isn't insanely surprising by timing, in the sense that, as you mentioned, he had a brief stint with the Atlanta Falcons. I was very curious why he would, felt that was his best opportunity, in the NFL at this point, given their quarterback carousel and depth chart. But wow, this is massive news, man. This is unbelievably massive news. This completely turns the CFL on its head. We'll see what happens here. We don't know a ton of detail, including when or if he'll play, if Rourke will play this weekend. What's wild about it is I would not rule it out. I don't think you can rule it out in this situation. I think you'd have, cause for hesitation, mind you, if it was Vernon Adams that was healthy and ready to go and has been leading your team to victories. He's on the shelf with a knee injury. Jake Dolegala hasn't done much. I know the third quarterback's one of his names is Bryce. He came in last week. He didn't, do much in his timing. The timing all fits for Nathan Rourke to come in here and work with this offense, work with this offensive coordinator, work with this team that he knows so much about, and go to work, man. This is way sooner than we thought it would be. I'm floored, man. I'm still digesting a lot of what we're seeing and hearing right now.
No, I'm right there with you. And again, to think that this is leading into a Sunday night game, a huge game with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. I'm with you. I don't rule anything out.
Sunday's a big deal. If it was Friday, we're probably not talking about it at all. He now has arguably a full week to prepare if he's going to be in the facility by Wednesday.
Well, and let's face it. I mean, this isn't going to Hamilton or Toronto or Ottawa, to a team where he's unfamiliar with the staff, the playbook. This is where he left. And I think that would put him far further along preparation, just being able to prepare to be ready to actually play. So, I mean, obviously this is something that everyone paying attention to the Canadian Football League is going to be watching throughout the week. And it's going to make, I would suggest that the media presence at BC Lions practice is going to be increased tenfold going up. But let me ask you this. I mean, we're talking about Nathan Rourke, what this means for this week. What do you think Vernon Adams is thinking right now as we digest this news?
Well, a couple things. One, I'm going to be fascinated on how this came to be. I mean, this feels like, this is pure speculation, but it feels like a Nathan Rourke move, right? That he came and said, hey, look, I'm interested in coming back to the CFL. I imagine, again, pure speculation on my part here, but I imagine he looked at his opportunities, whether or not they were drying up. This guy hasn't had meaningful game film, since he was with the Lions, right? And so this is a guy that needs more field time, and really at the age that he's in his mid-20s, has an opportunity to put in a good season this year and maybe turn some heads from the NFL, put game tape. It tells me just maybe, the injury that we've been hearing is week to week and not month to month for Vernon Adams is maybe a bit more serious than first suspected. But I don't even think Vernon Adams' injury plays into this at all. I don't think Nathan Rourke gives a shit about Vernon Adams' injury. I mean, I'm sure he cares about the BC Lions' future and whatnot, but I don't think it's one of those things that if he wanted to come back to BC, it wasn't going to be an issue of whether or not he was going to get playing time. I think this has potential to be really awkward for Vernon Adams. When he does come back, Vernon Adams was, being talked about as the MOP front runner before his injury. I mean, he was lighting things up. He was leading the league in all statistical categories for the most part. And now what is he? Is he a number 2? Is he trade bait? I mean, I know there's some, if you look at this week's games, Huss, there's potential for, I think, as many as 6 QB changes this week. So a lot of QB rooms are unsure around the league and would definitely be interested in a guy as dynamic as Vernon Adams. But this is an awkward situation.
We are getting reports as we do this live. Farhan Lalji is reporting that it is actually a 3-year deal. So
it is a
my speculation,
Amazing.
Wrong. According to Farhan, a 3-year deal with the BC Lions.
By Huss. Instant correction by Huss. Don't tell us we're not doing top-notch journalism here.
You're right here. Well, that's why I said it was speculation. I was just thinking that would sort of make sense, but they've crossed that bridge. Farhan Lalji reporting a 3-year deal, and he could start Sunday.
So re-ask the question about Vernon Adams. You want to can I get a redo on the Vernon Adams question? I think that's fascinating, man. I mean, this tells me that he is committed to the CFL. Now, there are NFL windows, right? So he has the opportunity that if he balls out this season, that he could potentially, again, attract attention from the NFL and leave during that window. So you have to think that's his plan here. But it's a nice backup plan to go to a city that clearly adores him, to a team that clearly needs and wants him. Now, the 3-year deal, though, Huss, that's the interesting part. The last time the Lions signed a quarterback to a multi-year deal, outside of Vernon Adams, I suppose. But what I'm trying to say was Michael Riley, and they announced how much money it was. They talked about it being a 4-year, $2.8 million deal, and how it was insane money for the CFL, and how this was going to open up the eyes to the people around the league who don't follow, or people around across the country who don't follow the league and think that it's, guys get paid minimum wage. They wanted to boast about this contract. Now you sign Nathan Rourke in his prime. This was Michael Riley at the end of his career. Like, a lot of people looked at that contract was like, that's bananas. But that was also at the time where the quarterbacks were really cashing in. Bo Levi Mitchell was making $700,000. I think he took a team friendly deal for that. But this is fascinating, man, to see what he's going to be making. It has the potential to set the bar for quarterbacks. You think it's way over 600, 650. What Chad Kelly's making in Toronto, it's got to be above that. And now with the whole idea of having marketing money and how much money you can spend on that, I know there's a floor. I'm not 100% sure there's a ceiling. So this could be a massive deal. And again, back to my original point, if I'm Vernon Adams, I mean, the writing's on the wall. It's one thing for Nathan Rourke to address the team. What's Vernon Adams going to say when clearly they have their quarterback of the future, when this entire time you're loving your time with the BC Lions, and now ultimately you're seeing it come to an end.
Well, things got very, very interesting in BC and around the Canadian Football League with this breaking news this morning. Nathan Rourke going back to BC after being released on the weekend by the Atlanta Falcons on a 3-year deal and could potentially start Saturday for the Bombers-Lions tilt. Well, listen, until further notice, the Montreal Alouettes are still the number 1 team in the league. And they've been thriving without Cody Fajardo. Davis Alexander now 3-0, playing very well in relief, and getting big contributions from newcomers like Charleston Rambo, who had 124 and 2 scores against the TiCats last week. Philpott unable to finish the game and going to need an MRI. But this Alouettes team is rolling. Clearly the class of the East. But while we're talking about quarterbacks that have been out, what an interesting matchup we look at this weekend between Saskatchewan and Montreal, who've both been playing without their starting quarterback. Trevor Harris is back at practice this week, assuming number 1 reps. We could have Cody Fajardo, and it would be a shame for the CFL if we didn't get Fajardo going back with Montreal as a Grey Cup champion to Saskatchewan to take on the Riders with their QB1.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, talk about storylines, 2 quarterbacks who were having strong seasons before they went down, potentially coming back. A lot to like on both sides. I mean, both teams have proven that I don't want to say Montreal's had a turnaround. They won the Grey Cup. Saskatchewan certainly has been, figuring it out with Shea Paterson here. I don't think he's certainly been okay. He hasn't been unbelievable, but he's been able to pass that 300-yard threshold on a couple occasions, and their defense has been keeping them in it. This Roland Milligan guy, man, holy smokes. I mean, this guy, my mid-season, if you will, defensive player of the year, I don't even think it's even close. Maybe a Darius Pickett out in Ottawa, but I just think there's, this guy has just been making plays. But let's focus on the 8-1 Alouettes here. I mean, I know I just kind of crapped all over them with the news with Rourke, because I really do think the BC Lions are going to change the narrative by season's end. But this Alouettes team, and I've said this to you before, us, on this show, on Winnipeg Sports Talk, they remind me a hell of a lot like the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Their belief, they're backed by an incredible defense. I mean, Noel Thorpe, what he's been able to do with that defense there. I mean, Bo Levi Mitchell lasted a few minutes before that defense, sidelined him for the rest of the game. They have an offense that guys step up, right? I mean, that was the bread and butter of Winnipeg's offense. I understand they had Zach Claris and what an arm he has and certainly has had for Winnipeg in those years, but it was guys stepping up in different games. It was Kenny Lawler having a big game. It was Dalton Schoen having a big game. It was Rasheed Bailey having a big game. It was Nick Dembski having a big game. It was Drew Woltarski having a big game. And of course, Brady Oliveira would, mixing in. It wasn't, and it was selfless, right? It was selfless football. Kenny Lawler didn't need 100 yards a week. Nick Dembski didn't need 7 catches a game. It was all by committee.
It's about winning.
It's about winning, and that's what you see under Jason Moss and what you see with this entire Alouettes team. And as you mentioned, Tyson Philpott, we'll see what comes to be of that injury. That could be a very significant injury for the Alouettes and their attack. Tyson Philpott's been unbelievable this year. But then you mentioned Charleston Rambo, a guy that steps up, who they've liked, and was ultimately brought in to replace Austin Mack, who I will add also got issued his release from the Atlanta Falcons. alongside Nathan Rourke. So we might see another player return to the CFL. I know Austin Mack had some interest. I see his potential of signing with the team or at least waiting the rest of the year much higher than Nathan Rourke's, of course, just given his position and whatnot. But he would be a guy that I imagine would come immediately to Montreal, much like with Nathan Rourke. He wanted to stick around last year. I mean, and it didn't sound like just words. When I was chatting with him in Montreal last season, he wanted to make it his home. He wasn't even thinking of the NFL. And ultimately, when he had the eye on the prize in the CFL, it led to those NFL opportunities. So we'll see what the future has with him. But this team just keeps rolling. They can figure out ways to win, whether they're losing their quarterback or losing the top receiver. That's the sign of a good team, and the Alouettes are just that at 8-1 so far.
Well, and listen, I mean, when it comes to Philpott, they're going to have the luxury of being 8-1 and being clearly the team to beat in the East to get him healthy and hopefully, most importantly, have him ready for the playoffs. And as far as Mac goes, guys want to get paid. And, listen, if they have an opportunity to go on a practice roster, maybe make some NFL money for sure. But if not, I don't think he's going to be sitting around and just waiting for the phone to ring for a couple months. So that's going to be something we'll pay attention to. One other quick note coming out of the Montreal Hamilton rematch was the fact that Bo Levi Mitchell spent the majority of the game on the bench after being sat down in the first half. Bo had actually had a pretty darn good season by the numbers, although it seems like the picks were really driving his coach nuts. Is this it for Bo as the starting quarterback? But what do you make of this situation, Hammer?
It might be the end of Bo Levi Mitchell as a starting quarterback with Scott Milanovic as head coach in Hamilton, because clearly he had seen enough. I mean, this to me is not just one errant throw. Bo Levi Mitchell had an interception in that game in one of his 2 series. So that was obviously the straw that broke the camel's back. I mean, that's been the issue with Bo Levi Mitchell over the last, really, since 2018. Now, he had a bit of he had a resurgence this season, no doubt. I mean, at the midway mark of the year, and taking into consideration the fact that he missed 55 minutes of that game this past weekend, he still leads the league in passing yards and passing touchdowns. Now, the problem is he also leads the league in interceptions, and it was clear in Scott Milanovic, not only his post-game comments, which he was super, super, hostile, I would say. Maybe hostile is a little aggressive, but he was hot. He was hot for sure in stating that Taylor Powell would be the quarterback of the starting quarterback next week or this week here, and which is interesting when you consider Taylor Powell didn't win the game. I mean, he played a majority of the game. Now, he hasn't. I imagine you don't just make these decisions without having it in the back of your mind for some time. And I'll remind the listeners and viewers here, I think it was on one of our earlier CFL 110 shows, or was one of my hits on Winnipeg Sports Talk when we were chatting. It must have been CFL 110 because we were talking about the TiCats, was that I've never seen a head coach rip into a football player like I saw Scott Milanovic rip into Bo Levi Mitchell in like week 2 or 3 of the season after one of his interceptions. And the reality here is Scott Milanovic had a conversation with Mitchell in the offseason when Mitchell wasn't convinced. Again, another reminder, this guy was benched in a must-win playoff game last year, didn't start that game, created a lot of controversy about his future. I think a lot of people were surprised and as far as shocked to see Bo Levi Mitchell back being the number 1 in Hamilton this season with Scott Milanovic at the reins. Scott Milanovic had a conversation with him to say, look, we can extend your career, but you're going to have to play like this style, right? This is a guy who is offensively minded quarterback guru, if you will, had a plan for Bo Levi Mitchell, and clearly Mitchell is not doing what Scott Milanovic wants him to do on the field, despite the number of passing yards and passing touchdowns he has. At the end of the day, I don't think Scott Milanovic gives a shit about how many yards Bo Levi Mitchell has and how many touchdowns he passed. All he cares about is how many wins are in the column, and whatever's happening on that offense with Bo Levi Mitchell at the controls isn't working. And those tough decisions are decisions that should be made by rookies like Taylor Powell, guys who've only been in the league for a couple seasons, not veterans like Bo Levi Mitchell. And at this point, I just think Scott Milanovic has seen enough. He doesn't want to put his cards on the table with, put all his chips in the middle of the table with Bo Levi Mitchell as his quarterback. And I think we're going to, I don't know if it's, here's the question. Is Scott Milanovic going to be the coach? Or is Bo Levi Mitchell going to start another game? Which is Milanovic going to get fired, or is Bo going to start another game? Which one is going to happen first? That's what it feels like in Hamilton. And I think in this case, Milanovic is just not willing to trust, his cagey veteran anymore, and is now willing to put the season and quite possibly his position in Hamilton, now with Taylor Powell leading the way.
Well, one way or the other, I'm pretty sure we're going to be seeing Bo Levi in one of those TSN seats.
Well, that's the other thing too. Did you see? Now, I think he's poking fun at it, but it's not that funny when you consider it. Like, he has a picture on Instagram of his two young, cute daughters running a lemonade stand, essentially calling them the breadwinners after he lost his job. So, to me, that's not at 2-7. It's hilarious. I certainly got a chuckle out of the post, but I mean, is that that doesn't look good, doesn't feel good for that situation, and we'll see what happens here in the coming weeks. And
nothing feels good. Out. Nothing feels good when you're 2-7, and even worse when you're carrying a clipboard.
Isn't that the truth?
Hammer, I Dusty was crazy. Dusty Nielsen. I mean, shout out to him for maybe the biggest grind in sports media. He did 17 games between the Alinka and the CFL over a 10-day span. But we were doing the lock shop together over on Edmonton Sports Talk, and he had mentioned he was driving to the game, to one of the games he was doing. He was listening to CFL 110. I guess it was maybe Friday. And it was after the Thursday game. And we basically finished off last week's show talking about chaos in the command center. And then Thursday happened. And I will say this will go down as one of the most bizarre CFL games in a long time. And that is saying something. A walk-off double overtime 22-22 tie that was 10-3 with less than 2 minutes left in the game. But what everyone's talking about is the fact that both teams on different instances thought that they had won the game in overtime. First off, it was Ottawa thinking that they had negated a third down play and it was time for handshakes. The command center ruled that was pass interference, extended the game, and the game kept going. And then when Ottawa was down a field goal on their final possession, Dustin Crum looked like he was sacked and lost the football. They called a roughing the passer for a low hit, which extended the game and allowed Ottawa the opportunity to kick the 3 points and give us a tie we will never forget. From where I'm sitting, and I know this is difficult and we were sort of on them, I do think they got both calls right. But I'll tell you what, I mean, just the fashion of how it happened. And again, part of it is the timing. And I don't know what you do. A third down play looks like it's over. It's overtime. The guys run off the field. I have a hard time getting too critical, but it was somewhat clunky, and it was not the way I think Randy Ambrosie wanted things to move smoothly. But I will say at the end, I think both teams will have their disagreements with it. I kind of think they got it right. And if there was ever an appropriate final score in a CFL game, 22-all was it last Thursday in the nation's capital.
You took the words right out of my mouth, Huss. If there was ever a game where two teams that deserved a tie, if there was a way for both teams to lose, I feel like that would have been more appropriate. Unfortunately, that's impossible in this sport, in this game. So a tie it is. Look, it just feels like you're rubbing salt in an open wound right now of the CFL Command Center, but they keep tripping over themselves and cutting themselves. That's the issue here. So the first one being, look, I agree with you. I think both calls were the right call. They both followed the rules. I do see the first one. I do see the challenge from Saskatchewan on the defensive pass interference as actually a sign of progress for the league. I say that because I don't need to remind people from Winnipeg, but people from across the league very much angered in Winnipeg, Bomberland, over the finish in Toronto, right, with Nick Dembski.
That was the Dembski play that turned into a pick six.
That turned into a pick six. And through my sources, the league actually called Winnipeg and told them they got it wrong. Now, they can't do anything about it. All they can really say is sorry. And so that's why I look at that call and I go, okay, that's the right play, because that one should have been called. And the reality is, you can't, just because you made a mistake earlier in the season doesn't mean you shouldn't correct it. And on the same hand, continue to make that mistake. So this to me was a sign of progress in that, they messed up earlier in the season and they called it right. And you're bang on at the end of the end of the game. At the end of the game, timing is everything. You have TSN who has already called the game final. You have players who are shaking hands and tapping each other's helmets and saying great game, great effort, whatever. You have guys leaving towards the locker room. You have guys in the locker room. You have coaches heading down to the locker room. You have media heading down. The game is over. And then you find out, whoa, the game's not actually over. The command center is now calling for a roughing the passer. This isn't a challenge. This isn't an opportunity that Saskatchewan had that they had, or that Ottawa had in overtime. This was a command center call. And what has to be absolutely infuriating for Redblacks fans, for Riders fans, is that the penalty, while correct in the writing of the law, is so bizarre, because the guy gets pushed in to Dustin Crum, and while he does hit contact low, I'm not sure what that defender is supposed to do in that play. So you make this call, you bring everybody back on. The part that, and we talked about this is the part where you mentioned with Dusty, is that we debated the command center last week. It was either a week before that or 2 weeks before that we were talking about teams having an issue, teams having an issue in what exactly defensive pass interference is. And here we are in week 9 and we still don't know. And you come out at, that's in the earlier call. Yeah, and we still don't know that play. And then the end of the call, the command center just comes out for no reason. Like what is it the command center was doing? Were they identifying that as a turnover and therefore you have to review a turnover? Do you then go, if reviewing the turnover, do you then have to decide on why not watch the receiver over on the left flank or the right flank to see if one of the DBs got a hand to the helmet? I don't understand the rhyme or reason that the command center comes in and then comes in at the worst possible timing, completely changes the makeup of the game.
Or the best possible timing if you're on the other side.
Depending on who you are. And then players have to come out. They've already shut their minds off from, being in game mode, and now they got to re-ramp back up. It was just a comedy of errors throughout that entire process, and it just delayed a game that, why not can we have some, I don't even want to call it human error, because I think the officials actually in this case saw a rule and said, you know what, that was the other guy pushing it. He didn't, abuse the rule. He didn't go after Crum's lower legs, and all of a sudden the command center comes out and goes, hey, it's almost kind of like The Undertaker or Stone Cold at the end of a WWE. They should have had the Stone Cold music come in, and Randy Ambrosie should have busted through the doors and said, no, this game isn't over, ripped his shirt off and forced another series to go in overtime. That's what that would almost make it enjoyable.
I would love it if they could add a WWE element to oh my God, that's Randy Ambrosie's music. We're not done yet. And go forward. Listen, I didn't see it as much that he was really pushed in.
Randy would be awesome, but even if it was just hold up, the command center has come in and it's just a shot. I mean, the thing is, the biggest takeaway for me in all this isn't yes, this command center looks bad. At the end of the day, the teams need to stay where they are. I think this is going to be the biggest takeaway in all of this. Isn't going to be, whoa, command center, watch yourself. Don't come in when the game's already over and tidy and everyone's leaving and people are rushing the field. It's going to be, okay, look, the command center has a job to do if there's a call being made, right, that's missed by the officials. And I go back to our chat last week where I said this is what it's for. You want them to get it right. You don't want it to be in a situation in a game like the Grey Cup or a playoff game where a quarterback actually gets a missed call's actually made. You want to have the command center there to fix egregious errors. I just don't think this one was an egregious error. And therefore, they're going to have to – the league is going to inform all the teams in their next meeting that in this situation, if it's an overtime game, if a play seems to have solidified the game, do not retreat to the locker room right away. I mean, you can celebrate if you're the winning team, that all that stuff happens, but you need to be ready. You can't have your players you can't have your coaches being headed down to the room. You can't have your players being sent to the locker room. And so that's really what made this whole thing super bizarre.
Well, and there was a little more to it. I'll just say I'm not gonna crap all over them. As awkward and, as I said, clunky as it was, I think that's why it's there. You want to make sure you get the call right. And I know there's been some dispute. I think it was roughing the passer based on the rule. I think he was reckless and a little kamikaze the way he went over the line, didn't have control of his body, contacted him below the knee. That's a penalty. Right. I think they got it right. And as I said, it was bizarre. It was uniquely CFL, but I think that's why we have the rules that we do right now. And I'm not going to throw any shade on them. But in addition to all of the chaos in overtime, once things were finally official after the 3 times, there was an altercation on the sidelines, after the game, involving head coach Bob Dice and some guy on the Saskatchewan Roughriders sideline. We had assumed it was a coach or one of team personnel. Apparently that wasn't the case afterwards, and the Riders kind of said, hey, he's not with us, and yet he was on. Like, what? We don't need to spend much time on this, but what was the takeaway on this? We understand some things were said that made Bobby Dice pretty pissed off, but will anything come out of this? And do we know who the hell the guy was?
So we don't know who the guy was. As you mentioned, there was early speculation. I know that John Hodge over at 3 Down Nation was there, happened to be on site. I think there's, look, the guy's been identified in a photo. His name hasn't been identified. From what I gather from John's reporting out there, is that this guy is somehow related to the league. He must be related to somebody. He can't not. This guy didn't just come off the street and was like, "Here's your pass to go on the field." Like, this was, the league has recognized that this wasn't a credentialed person on the field, so he was allowed to be there. Mind you, they've noted that he wasn't allowed to be in the players box. Now, there's certain levels of access on the field, and so without knowing fully what this guy's access was, but knowing that he wasn't allowed in the team area, there's a box that extends beyond like the benches and stuff. That's kind of a marker for cameramen, for reporters, just kind of giving you a bit of a territory not to go into. So it's not like just this guy's not allowed to go into the player box. Most people, if not everybody, minus maybe some TSN people that are doing on the field interviews, aren't allowed in that area. But it is an interesting situation. I think it's a bit of a wake-up call for the league. I don't see the altercation being that big of a deal. Mind you, I'm not trying to downplay what is being speculated or alleged that the guy was there was some racial overtones involved. So I don't know anything about that. I don't know what words were spoken. I tend to believe Bob Dice. He's one of the nicest guys in the Canadian Football League. I don't think he would be lying about maybe some of the language he took exception to. Again, I don't have the full details on that, but I see it more as like, a thing that shouldn't happen in this league. Like, the league should have security. The league should know that this guy, and notice this guy is, too close to the team. He shouldn't have been there for as long as he was there. I just don't understand any of that part. I think it did play into the fact that this whole snafu at the end with players leaving and coming, there were fans on the field. They end up figuring that out.
I actually thought that it might have been,
which would make a hell of a lot more sense, because I think the biggest takeaway here, Huss, is if you have credentials to be on the field and you're not connected to either team, just shut the hell up and watch the game.
No, I thought that it might have been. We know how well the Riders are supported on the road. And I thought that maybe after the chaos of overtime and thinking the game was over a second time, I thought maybe a couple of Rider fans maybe had gotten down on the field.
Oh, for sure.
And just sort of hung tight there.
Like
Anyways, that'll be something that they'll be following out. But
just the thing, Huss, to answer your question, I don't think that guy will ever be allowed on the sidelines again in the CFL game. That will be, I think, his punishment. I think they'll go out of their way to make sure he isn't publicly identified, because I think with the way the world works today, I don't know if, again, I'm not underplaying what was said or what wasn't said or whatever, but just the public, like his photo's already floating out there. So, I think I have a hard time thinking that guy will be anywhere near a bench in the future.
It's a mutual parting of ways between that guy and CFL sidelines. One other takeaway we'll get to quickly is Drew Brown's injury. He is out. Jeremiah Masoli with a big opportunity to start for the Redblacks this week, but it does sound like it's good news that they don't believe that Drews, who's had such a great start to the next chapter of his career as a starting quarterback in Ottawa, will be back at some point in the relatively near future. But I'm really interested to see what Masoli does this week after being on the bench for a considerable amount of time after some real tough injuries that derailed his career.
Yeah, tough sledding for Drew Brown for sure. That's a second injury that he's missing action for. So it's that is a bit of a red flag, if you will. This is his first season as a starter, and that's part of being a starter is your ability to be available. To go through the rigors of getting hit every day as a quarterback. So that's unfortunate. But as you mentioned, good news. Doesn't sound like he's going to be all that long. I'm with you, man. I'm a massive Jeremiah Masoli guy. When you look at what he's done what he's been unable to do the last 2 seasons, what he's endured the last 2 seasons, ending both years with season-ending injuries, to have the Achilles injury in that first year in Ottawa, there was so much optimism with Jeremiah Masoli going to the nation's capital. He was going to turn that, organization around after some playoff-less years, and then to go through what he went through with the Achilles. And the thing was, it was well documented, man. I mean, he wasn't shy about it. That is a very, very, very difficult injury to come back from. It was well documented about, him and his relationship and the support he had from his family, and just how much pain he essentially went through getting back onto the field, and then to suffer a catastrophic knee injury after that. I mean, that's, I wasn't one of the silent people in it. I know a lot of people were thinking, I wasn't boasting my chest about it. I thought it was incredibly disappointing, but I didn't think Jeremiah Masoli would ever be back on the field, not because I didn't think he was capable of it, and not because I didn't think he wasn't going to warrant a starter's salary, which he ultimately doesn't. He restructured his deal to come back, was because I didn't think he was going to go an entire year of doing the exact same thing after a grueling process the year before. But here we are at the midway mark of the season, and you have to love football to do what he's doing. And so I hope the best for Jeremiah Masoli. I hope that Jeremiah Masoli throws the lights out. I don't want him to replace Drew Brown. I'm a big Drew Brown guy too. But I hope that he showcases his talents across the league. I hope he does well. And at the very least, I hope he gets the ending that he wants, and it's not decided for him. And I believe that was all the motivation that he had to get back on the field.
Well, he'll be under center in Calgary for Ottawa and Calgary to kick off the week Thursday night on TSN in the Canadian Football League. Jeff, last week we did the program and officially announced the return of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers to the competitive part of the Canadian Football League with that incredible win over BC, shutting them out 25-0. It was an unbelievable week for the Bombers being on the bye. BC loses, Calgary loses, and Saskatchewan ties. This week, is it time to say the Elks are back? 0-7 start. Trey Ford goes in. Now, he got knocked out of the game, but provided them with a 6-point lead. MBT came in and held down the fort. The Elks now have won 2 in a row. Certainly are looking like a much more competitive and legitimate CFL team. Is this team going to be have the opportunity, or will they find themselves back into the playoff conversation in the second half of the season?
I think they're already in the playoff conversation at 2-7. That's the crazy part about it. Do they have a strong case for a playoff spot? No. But like it was in Hamilton not long ago, if you can string together 2 victories in as many weeks, you find yourself back in the mix. That's not going to work in a couple weeks' time. You can't continue. You're kind of hitting the threshold here at the mid-season where it can't be like, oh, yeah, there's still time. you are running out of runway. But it's not even just the fact that the Elks have won 2 games in a row. It's who they've beaten. Now, mind you, there's a massive pretext to that, and that's the fact that both the Montreal Alouettes, remind me here, 10. Sorry, they just finished off of Montreal.
Who they were playing?
Sorry, BC Lions. 33-16. I was thinking BC Lions and Riders. So
Riders and Lions.
It's who they've beaten too. That's what I mean. And they beat the Riders in Regina. Right?
42 on that defense.
And we just saw a Regina team, we just saw them go the distance with Ottawa, who we were talking about a week and a half ago about being as hot as they get in the East right now. So I am buying into them. I'm buying into their confidence. I'm buying into their urgency, because that was the thing that that's the situation with the Elks. That's the situation with the Bombers. That's the situation with anybody who is hovering around 2 or 3 wins right now, is that you have playoff-like mindset. You don't have the luxury of losing again this week and thinking about it. You have to keep winning here. So, again, there is a massive caveat in the fact that Trevor Harris wasn't playing for Saskatchewan, and of course Cody Fajardo wasn't playing for them. But I just think VA. I keep thinking Montreal. Jeez, VA wasn't playing for the BC Lions. We're talking about the 8-1 Alouettes. They don't lose to a team like Hamilton or Edmonton. Sorry. So VA is a guy that they were, is a guy that wasn't in, obviously, and Jake Dolegala wasn't all that impressive, but it's still good elements of teams. There's still teams with good defenses in some cases, good special teams in other ways. So they're getting the job done, and they're doing it when they need to get it done. I don't like the fact that Trey Ford got injured. Obviously, I think Trey Ford gives his team the best opportunity of winning, but I like the fact that McLeod Bethel Thompson came in and continued to play well in that game. That matters. I'm not saying that, I don't think McLeod Bethel Thompson was the issue before that, but I do think that him coming in and not, and just picking up essentially where Trey Ford left off, I think was an important part of that offense too. And you have a bit more confidence here. You start putting wins in, you start feeling better around the facilities. You start feeling like a winning team, even though you have way more losses than victories. And I think that's what we see with the Elks right now.
Here's why the Elks are back. We can even take out BC and Saskatchewan, even though they've come back to the pack and are far from being, comfortably in the top 2 spots. Let's just give them those top 2 spots.
Yep.
Calgary lost again. They've got 4 wins. The Bombers have 3. Edmonton has 2. Here's Edmonton's schedule. They've got the TiCats this weekend, a tough game following that against the Alouettes. Then home and home against Calgary, Labor Day weekend and the following weekend. Then home and home against the Bombers, a game against the Riders, and then a third matchup against the Calgary Stampeders. And then they finish it off against the Argos. This is absolutely on again in the West for every one of these teams. And the Edmonton Elks can look at their schedule and their head-to-head matchups against the 2 teams they're chasing to get into third and realize that their destiny is in their own hands. One other topic that's been interesting, and I've kind of been focused this from a betting standpoint, talking about Calgary, is that I will back the Stamps at home and I will fade them on the road until further notice. That held true last week with their loss in Calgary. But man, when you look at these road records, Calgary's now 0-5. The Bombers are 0-4. Ottawa, Toronto, Edmonton, and Hamilton have just 1 road victory apiece and are 4-12. Only the Alouettes, who've been unbelievable all season long, are 4-0. Everyone else is under 500. Home field advantage seems to mean a lot more this year than maybe it has traditionally in the CFL.
Well, home field advantage always meant a lot. It's not just the CFL, it's in all professional sports. You protect home and you try to win half your road games.
It's skewed big time towards the home teams this year.
Sure, absolutely. And it is a bit, I don't want to say unprecedented, because there are in and around the same amount of teams that do have, with the situation right now, there's 1 or 2 teams that kind of have a winning road record. There usually is about three or 4 in the league. And so that could even out by the end of the season. But early on, it's been tough sledding. It's been protecting the house has been a major theme in this league. And, it's uncharacteristic of the Bombers, who have had some pretty pretty great road records over the last few years, to be sure. And, even teams like BC, it hasn't been easy for obviously, as you mentioned, the clubs like, who have gone over on the road, but that's the reality of that's the reality of not, sleeping in your own bed at home, the reality of eating your own, food. And while the road is used by many teams to grow and bond and enjoy yourself, maybe there's a bit of a Montreal flu going around. Maybe there's a bit of a BC curse out there. Like, maybe guys are enjoying themselves a little bit more on the road than in previous years. But it certainly is a wacky trend, something to keep an eye on. And certainly, as you said off the top, Haas, perhaps even taking into consideration when you're making your bets week in and week out, and a team that may look like, they have a ton of points, or a team that you might think that could be an upset, is probably likely going to happen on home turf than on the road, given what we've seen so far this year.
Never a bad move, taking a bunch of points on a home dog more often than not. One other story about a guy that has not played yet, but this will be, frankly, it's going to probably take second fiddle to everything around Nathan Rourke, given this morning's news. But Chad Kelly, 9 games are in the books. There were a bunch of things that the CFL laid out that he would have to do before he was reinstated. What are you hearing right now about Chad Kelly?
Yeah, it's just, I think the process has been ongoing this entire time. He's been being watched, and we talked about this on last week's show, just the process. I'd mentioned I'd done a whole investigation into what exactly this process looked like with the gender-based violence policy. Flags on the play, it's called. I'll plug it again. I did it ahead of the Johnny Manziel welcoming to the league. And this had nothing to do with the actual violating the policy on home soil, which is this case for Chad Kelly, but it does undergo the exact same process in which that Chad Kelly has been evaluated through this entire half of football, not even just this half season of football, but the months leading in, or the time leading into the season. His monitoring, if you will, would have began immediately upon that news. And so you have these gender-based violence experts, looking into Chad Kelly, looking at his behavior, looking at his social media posts, looking at anything and everything, talking to anybody and everybody. They're supposed to talk to the victim in this situation, so we'll see how that process worked out. But ultimately, what's happening right now is they're gathering all of their information that they've gathered throughout this entire process. They're sitting down with Chad Kelly. They're going through his progress reports. He's been going to classes, seeing what the feedback is from those people, and ultimately sitting down with him and evaluating ultimately if he's learned his lesson. So that's really, if Chad Kelly, I think it's great timing for the Argos in the sense that they have the bye week this week. That process can play itself out. Chad Kelly, if successful through that process, if they deem him worthy of a second chance in this league, will have the opportunity to kind of work with the team, get on the field, have a full week with the offense next week. But that process needs to happen. And ultimately, if Chad Kelly's back on the field or is reinstated back into with the Argos and back into the league is ultimately going to be saying that Chad Kelly did everything that we asked of him through this process, and we believe and we stand behind our decision to allow him to play, which I think puts them at a ton of risk. I think there's a lot of factors that play into this. I think I will give credit to MLSE. I think that they've handled this the right way in the sense that Chad Kelly, we talked about this last week, Chad Kelly was permitted to practice, be around the team throughout this entire suspension, but they didn't have him on the field. They chose not to. They didn't want him to be a distraction. I think that was the right call in all this. But MLSE has a big say in this league, big say amongst the commissioner, amongst the decision-making. So when this process comes to a final decision, I don't know how cooperative MLSE might be if the league goes to them and says Chad Kelly hasn't shown signs or whatever. They might not have that decision, but a lot of stuff in the back room here. I'm not trying to add dirty speculation per se, but there have been instances with Chad Kelly since his punishment where he has shown signs where there is no maturity grown. There hasn't been progress, right? So we'll see what happens with that. But ultimately, even if Chad Kelly does get permitted to play, this isn't over. Like, it's not like you've cleared this, you're all good. He'll be viewed at and watched throughout this entire season as he returns.
Well, for sure. And I mean, I would imagine this is probably happening quietly during the Argos bye week, going through everything that he's done. I'm kind of with you that, listen, for Chad Kelly particularly, who has a long rap sheet of being a knucklehead, to put it charitably, it wasn't about hanging around and just waiting for the 9 weeks. It was a bunch of things he needed to do to prepare himself to get back into a professional situation, acting like a professional, and giving the people that will be co-signing this the confidence that nothing like this will happen again. And that is what is happening. He won't be back on the field until that has been confirmed. I would expect we'll have an update at some point, probably early next week, if he's done it all. Otherwise, it'll be a waiting game for Chad Kelly, and who knows what the future is. Wow, what a wild episode today. Before we go, a quick look at this weekend's games. We mentioned Ottawa's in Calgary to kick things off on Thursday. Just heading over to our friends at coolbet.com and checking out the lines. The Stamps are a 3-point favorite in that game. The Alouettes potentially looking at Harris and hopefully Fajardo on Friday night. 1 point favorite for the Montreal Alouettes right now.
Over under on that one.
Totals 51 on that one.
Wow, that's two good defenses.
Yeah, so I mean, I think they're expecting those quarterbacks to be playing.
Maybe, but even with those quarterbacks, you don't necessarily come back after an absence and throw the lights out. Cody Fajardo, if you look at his history, he doesn't come back gunslinging. I think when he came back from his 2-game absence last year, they lost 3 straight, and he was horrible in his first game back. So,
well, the Cody since the last 3 minutes of the Grey Cup is a different player. So I'm reserving all judgments until we see him out there. And let's not forget about the nature of a return to Saskatchewan that I don't believe happened last year.
Great point.
This is the game of the week, or was at least until the news today of Nathan Rourke. Edmonton and Hamilton. No
precautionary reasons for Fajardo this week.
Edmonton and Hamilton on Saturday. The Elks are laying points on the road. What do you know? Favorite again. -2 Edmonton in Hamilton taking on Taylor Powell. I think I'll be on Edmonton on that side. And then the one game that's off the board right now for obvious reasons, the Bombers and Lions on Sunday night, and the potential return of Nathan Rourke, who, if you joined us late, has re-signed a 3-year deal with the British Columbia Lions this morning here on Tuesday. Will be at practice tomorrow, and as reported by Farhan Lalji, could start as early as Sunday. What a week in the Canadian Football League, and what an edition of CFL 110. Again, big thanks to our friends at Garage Living Winnipeg for their support of WST. And of course, our friend Pat Kanuga. Again, the push is on, folks. If you want to get a clean, organized garage this fall before the snow flies, give Pat and Garage Living a call today at 204-999-1234. And check out their website at garageliving.com for all the amazing work they've been doing for Winnipeg Sports Talk CFL 110 listeners and people in the Winnipeg and Saskatchewan markets, as well as coast to coast. For Jeff Hamilton of the Winnipeg Free Press, I'm Andrew Paterson. We'll continue to monitor the Nathan Rourke situation and the lead up to Bombers Lions all week long on Winnipeg Sports Talk. And we'll see you next week right here on CFL 110, presented by Garage Living Winnipeg.
You've been listening to CFL 110. Tune in next week for more great Canadian football discussion.